welcome. My name is Jeff Gherardi. I'm the Director of Engineering Services here at GoEngineer, and I've been involved with our PDM implementation team for several years now. The webinar this afternoon will take a look at some of the changes to EPDM in 2015. I expect most of the audience to be primarily PDM administrators, but I'll start with some updates to the user interface, which will be more widely applicable to everyone on the session. And then we'll get into some more of the behind-the-scenes magic that the administrators would be interested in. So I'm sure you're all as excited as I am to get started, so we'll go ahead and jump right in to our first topic. Now, if I was going to sit here and explain the user interface to you, I probably should have picked a different quote. So instead, I'm going to highlight some of the updates for 2015. SolidWorks actually does a very good job every year within EPDM of not really interrupting the user's environment. Layout, button placement, general user experience remain fairly consistent from one release to the next. So let's first take a look at some of the improvements to tables. We've really got 4 areas in EPDM where a user actually interacts with the tables. The first being our reference dialog boxes, our check-in, check-out, change state dialog boxes. There's a couple more, but these are the dialog boxes where it lists a file and all of the references. We've got bills of materials, we've got contains, we've got where used information. All three sections now provide a type column, which gives you a thumbnail preview of your part, assembly, or drawing as you hover over it on the left-hand side. And when hovering or selecting a row, the entire row gets highlighted, making it much easier to identify the data corresponding to your selection. Additionally, in bills of materials, editable cells have a blue border, and any rows with edited values will actually highlight in yellow, indicating that there's been a change. Now, I know some of you probably have a keen eye and notice that this is not actually a named BOM, which we all know is an editable BOM by default. But this is actually a computed BOM. So naturally, your next question is going to be, but Jeff, how are you editing values in a computed BOM? Doesn't that defeat the purpose? Well, I'll break with the title of the presentation a little bit, since this capability isn't actually new to 2015, but it's a little known tip nonetheless. If you've got subcomponents checked out and you're looking at the bill of material of a higher level assembly, you can actually modify those subcomponents' data card values directly from the assembly bill of materials. It's a really convenient way to update multiple files at the same time, unless you prefer hunting through the vault to find each file individually and modify each data card individually. That one's going to be up to you. In terms of our icons, the buttons and icons in EPDM have really just been updated with a more modern and less cartoony feel. The icons should be fairly obvious. We've had these designations in the past. A few of them that I've noted here are only available in the SolidWorks add-in. The rest of them are available in the version tab, the search results, and the Windows Explorer details view. But wait, did he really just say details view in Windows Explorer now has icons? Why, yes, I did. This is actually one of my favorite enhancements of 2015 because so many people have requested this capability and this functionality over the last couple of years. So how does one go about adding the version information, the local version information, into the details view? Well, I'm sure most of you are using custom file lists for Explorer view for Windows Explorer already. So we're actually just going to go in and add a version number in the angle brackets there, and that will add it to our Windows Explorer detail view, along with the icons that we just saw on the previous screen. One of my favorite enhancements for 2015. So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about how EPDM licenses are now served. How many of you know what this is? Probably all of you. It's your EPDM license file, and you usually ended up calling me about 10 minutes after you finished an upgrade because you realized no one could log in. Guess what? We don't use that anymore. The licensing is now activation-based through the SolidWorks SolidNetWork License Manager. So you don't have to request any more license files from me. So let's talk a little bit about what's not changing in EPDM licensing. We're still using floating licenses. They're still based on the number of concurrent users logged into the system. All of the vaults on a particular server still share that same pool of licenses. And Windows logins, LDAP, still both valid authentication types. So, you know, from the functional standpoint, from the client standpoint, really nothing's changing with how those licenses are served up to the users. What is changing, however, is we're now using the SolidWorks SolidNetwork License Manager, which is a FlexLM-based tool. We'll have to use the full 24-character serial number, and it is a single activation serial number, so you get to activate that once. One of the advantages to the users are you'll be able to see who's consuming the licenses if none are available, either through the SolidNetwork License Manager or through the archive status in the administration tool. And that also gives us the ability to use a FlexLM options file in conjunction with our EPDM network license. So reserving licenses for groups or users, some advanced timeout options, things like that. The SNL Manager is included in all of the EPDM installation media, so you don't need to find that and download it elsewhere. Activation does require an internet connection, and if your servers are not connected to the internet, we still have the email activation request where you generate a host file, we send you back a text file to put in a particular folder. Our tech support team can certainly help you with that. And that same SNL Manager can also serve up your SolidWorks licenses. So you can add your SolidWorks serial numbers to the EPDM License Manager, or vice versa, if you just have a single server that serves out licenses. So if we're going to set this up, we go into the administration tool. We go to our licensing node, just like we'd normally read in our text file. And instead, we add in 25734 or 25735 if we're using a firewall at your server name, and click OK. Clients will have to be restarted if they're already connected. That's no big deal. And in order to check and see who's using the licenses and how many are available, you can go to that same license tool again and check users, computers, when they logged in, things like that. So it's better to assign permissions than to ask for forgiveness. That's what I always say, or something like that. I don't think that sounds quite right. But anyways, let's talk about permissions anyways. Let's talk about what happens when you first add or create a file in the vault. You're typically doing a save as or a copy paste. That file shows up in your local view, and behind the scenes, a database record's being created for the file so that the system is aware that this file exists. Custom property information or data card information are added to a table in the database. You'll also notice that the file is typically shown as being checked out to you. And all of this happens before the physical file is checked in and made available for other users on the archive server. We've typically referred to this period after adding but before checking in the file for the first time as private mode or local mode. When a file is in this status, there are only two users who are aware of the file's existence. There's the user who created the file, and the admin user. No one else can see that the file exists. You wouldn't see it in a folder. It wouldn't be returned in search results for anyone else. So anyone else except you that would know that the file existed. So there's really two scenarios that come to mind where this can creep up and be a problem. First is if you get a duplicate file name warning and you don't actually believe it because you've run a search and you can't find any other files with that file name. Or the second scenario where you tell your buddy to go open a file and they shout back, hey, I can't see that file. Are you sure you gave me the right file name? Well, we've now got a permission that can be set so that users know if that file actually exists. So it takes this, which is what we would normally see in a folder, and if you had created a file and hadn't checked it in yet, and it turns it into this. It shows me that the file exists. It's italicizing the file name and all the information about it, shows me who's created it, and the state is actually listed as private state. So again, I know the file exists, I just can't do anything with it. You'll also be able to remind your neighbor that they still need to check in their work. So this new permission is a folder permission. We can assign it at the user or group level. And again, it's found under folder permissions, may see files before initial check-in, parentheses, private state. This actually provides a nice segue into the topic of duplicate file names. When do you know today when you've created a duplicate file name in EPDM? The answer is once it's too late. You find out as you're trying to check in your file, and you probably already have references established, and now you need to rename some files before you've had the ability to check them in. So wouldn't it be great if we knew about potential duplicate issues earlier, say like when you're first saving or adding a file? Well, the developers at SolidWorks agree and now prompt us with a warning much earlier than in the initial check-in. So first off, we have to prevent duplicate file names from being allowed in our system. Then, if I come in and try to add a file with a duplicate file name, I've told that it's a duplicate right at the outset, and I'm also shown the other folders or file information where that duplicate happens to exist. Previously, I would have had to wait and back out of my check-in dialog box, launch a search, find the duplicate instances, and decide what to do from that point forward. Our final permission or the final new permission in EPDM 2015 is one for moving files and folders. Previously, users were permitted to move files if they had add or rename file or add or rename folder in the destination folder and delete file or delete folder in the source folder. Now, in 2015, while we still need the add or rename in the destination folder, move and delete have been segregated into two different permissions. So you don't need to grant someone delete permissions. You instead have new selections for move file and move folder. There's also a separate state permission for move file that you would need to set in that particular state. So you can allow WIP files to be moved and prevent released files from being moved, for example. A final note on new permissions, because they just didn't exist in previous versions of the software, when you go and upgrade, they're not enabled by default. So if you need any of those capabilities to be able to see files in private states or move files or things like that, you'll actually have to go back, go through your groups, review your group permissions, and enable them in your 2015 environment. So just remember, these things don't get turned on by default when you upgrade. So I get to have fun at work sometimes. Hopefully you do too, but in any event, we'll take a look at the workflows. Now, people oftentimes ask me what it takes to be an engineer, and I can usually boil it down to a simple decision-making process. Does it move? Should it? And WD-40 or duct tape is your solution. But for those of us with more complex processes, we use EPDM to manage those processes. Way back in 2013, we actually added a new workflow transition type called parallel transition. It had the potential to streamline a lot of the complexities managing multiple sign-offs. However, it really wasn't appropriately able to capture signer information and record it on the data card as people were approving. It would only capture and write that information for the last signer or the last necessary signature. So fast forward to 2015, and now we do have the ability to write data from all of the signers back to the data card once the required number of signatures has been captured. So let's take a look at how we would actually set that up. So I first select the parallel transition in my workflow, confirm that it's actually a parallel transition, and you'll see that I've already added the roles and number of signers required, defining who can sign off. So I'll come in here now and add my set variable action to capture the engineering approval. I'm going to tie that to a data card variable called approval1 and capture the user's initials. I then go down to the mapped approvers and select the group that I want that value written for. It's actually going to hold that data in memory until all of the signers are captured. So it will only write this information back once everyone has signed off. So we're not creating 3 versions of the file during the transition. It'll do it all at once at the end. You're basically going to rinse and repeat for the other approval groups until you've captured all that information, whether it's signers, whether it's dates, whether it's whatever piece of metadata that you're actually interested in capturing. So the parallel transition type, is it for me? There are still a few limitations to this attribute mapping. For example, what if a user is a member of more than one approver group? How does it know, which group that user is signing for? So this parallel transition attribute mapping is really intended for users who are signers in only one group or always signing for a particular group. What if we need a way to report either through the search tool or reporting tool of who has and who hasn't signed yet? Well, we haven't actually written those values to the file data card, so it's not necessarily easy for an end user to get that information. There's probably a couple more scenarios that may discourage this use, but if you do have any questions regarding the parallel transition types and if they're appropriate for your particular company's workflow, let us know. We're happy to take a look and look at your particular use case and see if it makes sense to employ these types of transitions. Well, that's just about everything I was hoping to show you guys briefly this afternoon. Thank you for attending. I do appreciate you spending time with us, and hope you found some of this information helpful. If you do have any questions, please use the question window in GoToMeeting, and I'll stay on the line for a few more minutes and answer some of those questions, or you can always email me directly. My email address is on the screen, and I can get you more information or spend some additional time answering those specific questions. That's all we got. Have a great rest of the day, and again, thanks for joining us.